Welcome to TedxMSJC. I am your Master of Ceremonies, Bianca Swan-Finch, and I serve as the chair of the theater department on the original campus of the Mount San Jacinto Community College District. With great pleasure, I introduce to you our Superintendent President, Dr. Roger Schultz.
Hi, I'm Dr. Roger Schultz, Superintendent President of Mount San Jacinto College, and I want to welcome you to TedxMSJC. I want to thank you for viewing this great show, but also I want to thank our speakers, and we have a great lineup for you. I also want to thank the Honors Program and the Communication Studies Department for putting on this event. TEDx is about ideas worth sharing, and today's topic will be about awareness, and what better time than in 2020 to be aware of many dimensions. So sit back, listen to our great slate of speakers, and enjoy the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Welcome Angelica Anderson, who will introduce our speakers.
And now I would like to introduce you to Aaron Norris. Prior to being the Vice President of Marketing for tech company CoreLogic, Aaron was a professional actor on Broadway. He also has a background in real estate and speaks nationally on technology and housing trends.
It's not where you start, it's where you finish. It's not how you go, it's how you land. This lyric from Seesaw the Musical always reminds me that we don't often have control of where we start. And while we do have some control of the destination, we have little control of the twists and turns that life throws our way. Our job is to focus on that landing and being open to the possibilities, because where you land is not always what you planned. This is me at 3. Painfully shy. So why I thought a career in theater was a good idea still baffles me today. I figure it's a combo of 3 things. Number 1, my older brother was doing it, and any cool points I could get with him was necessary. Number 2, nobody told me that I had to audition. And finally, the magic. The very first musical I saw was Alibaba at Riverside Children's Theater. My brother was one of the leads, and I will never forget being in a packed audience watching my brother sing completely off key with 100 other kids running around stage entertaining a crowd. That was magic, and I wanted to be a part of it. Sitting in a seat very close to the one in this picture, they called my name. My mom nudged me to get up on the stage. Tears immediately started swelling up as I went center stage and made the 90-degree turn to face my critics and the 100 other kids that were there to audition that day. I immediately began to ugly cry through my song, and I glanced over at my mom for moral support. The problem was she was crying too. But I did it, and I got cast. Well, all right, so did every other kid whose parents were willing to pay for the admission that year, but I said yes. Dopey was definitely my big breakout role. Very appropriate because these ears were so big they didn't fit the prosthetics, so they had to put little spot toppers on top. That was awesome. 2 years later, I landed the title role of Pinocchio in Pinocchio. This is my best friend Ryan to this day, and my little sister playing Cleo the fish. Auditions got easier, and I actually started enjoying myself. Peter Pan at Riverside Civic Light Opera at Riverside Community College was my very first semi-pro gig. The show gave me 3 unique firsts. First, unlike Riverside Children's Theater, not everybody who auditioned got in. Number 2, I got my first college credits, thank you very much, 1.5 units. And number 3, it was the very first time I was around kids that really wanted to be there. Total theater nerds. I mean, they had professional headshots, some had agents, one had even been on TV. And legit, some of them had like some serious stage moms. But surrounding myself with that kind of drive and being aware of the talent in the room inspired me to work harder. And I was hooked. So I was a little surprised in my high school career assessment that basically said arts didn't rank at all. I had no idea what I wanted to do, so why not? I decided to apply to Cal State Fullerton for an advertising major with a minor in music. Wasn't ready to give up arts just yet. At the end of my second year, I was walking down the music department and I saw a flyer. The American Musical and Dramatic Academy. New York City? 2-year conservatory? I said yes. I got accepted and I picked up everything and moved all the way to New York City for the fall semester. This is Times Square in 1997, very close to the scene of my very first Broadway musical, Grease, starring Xena the Warrior Princess as Rizzo. As I watched my very first Broadway show, I got wicked concerned. Not because the TV princess was playing in the musical, but because I was clearly not ready. Every single cast member, down to the smallest of the ensemble, was absolute perfection. I had some serious work to do, and I was very aware that I was not ready. I saw every Broadway show possible. One of my favorite habits was going in a half hour early as soon as they opened a theater, and I would pour through the playbill. I wanted to know what every cast member had done in their career. I wanted to know where they trained and who they gave credit to, because success leaves clues. Why start from scratch, right? Every show inspired me to work a little bit harder. I began to sign up for extra classes and gymnastics outside of school. I knew that there was 100 guys right behind me that wanted it just as bad as I did, if not more. And I had to show up and play hard. To save money to pay for all my extra classes, I lived in some very interesting places. This is my bed in the hallway in Hell's Kitchen. The bricks would often crumble on my face in the middle of the night. There was no AC. The bathroom was off the kitchen and it didn't have a door, and I had to climb 4 flights of stairs just to get into the apartment. And I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I didn't come to New York City to sleep. After graduation, I learned that the arts was not an easy profession. I signed up for a career that I got rejection almost every day. I didn't always know where my next paycheck was going to come from. And I had to be willing to pick up absolutely everything and go somewhere completely new, however long they needed me, at the drop of a hat, even in foreign countries. If my parents had any inkling that I would fail or that, hey, I even sucked, they never let me know. They made it a habit of surprising me at almost every single show I ever did, even showing up in foreign countries, even when I was playing Ricky Martin out of Puerto Rico. Good casting choice. They were my champions. Champions are those inner circle people that love and authentically support you no matter what. They don't always have to be blood related, because when life gets hard, you need them around you. You better cultivate those champions, be aware of who they are, and treat them right, because you're going to need them. This picture was one of those moments. I didn't tell you the complete story of why I ended up in New York. Yes, I left to pursue a dream, and maybe it's because I was listless in California, but I also ran away. I had long knew I was gay, and I genuinely feared that the moment I came out, I would be disowned. New York City was my exit and a way to completely go out on my own and know that I would be okay. I don't have time for that story in this story, but my worst nightmare never came true. These two were my champions, and they never let me down. And it's a good thing, because I did not disappoint. I came with great stories and some great trips that they got to go on. My first break came out of college. It was a European tour of 42nd Street. What you can't tell in this photo was I'm dancing on a sprained ankle, and I'm with Parasite. Yep, my first night in Europe, I ate 2 street burgers and ended up in a Spanish hospital. But I never missed a performance. I wish I had a picture of my first union contract, Princess Turandot. I was probably too busy doing 8 shows a week off Broadway, working 30 hours a week, and juggling a full-time schedule so I could finish my undergrad degree. Who has time for pictures when you're doing that kind of schedule? But I showed up. I never missed a show, and I never let them see me sweat. My most embarrassing audition was definitely Damn Yankees. At the callback, all the guys were asked to throw some tricks because there was a number in the show where every single ball player had to be able to tumble. Surrounded by 50 other guys and in front of the entire directing team, I proceeded to do a round off, back handspring, back tuck-ish. I didn't stick the landing. Well, I did stick the landing into the laps of the casting directors. I missed the landing, but I got the gig. They said yes, and I was really lucky they did. You see, the dance captain at Damn Yankees introduced me to another friend of his who worked on Wall Street, and I wouldn't appreciate this moment in time until many, many years later. From 5 p.m. to 1 at night at Rockefeller Center, I was in a bullpen with other professional artists working on acquisition and merger presentations. These presentations compiled massive amounts of data showing off potential deals to investors, and I really liked it. I learned about branding, marketing, corporate due diligence, and data. Creative and a data guy? Unicorn status, right? I know. The job allowed me to finish my undergrad. It allowed me to hit all my auditions and even take gigs outside of the city for months, knowing that when I got back, they would hire me back, and I was incredibly grateful. My professional career started picking up steam. I was getting callbacks for 3 Broadway productions. My agent was calling a little bit more, and I was on the edge, so close of getting what I had come to New York for. And on the 62nd floor of Rockefeller Center, I got the call. The cancer had returned. Mom was in stage 4, and suddenly it didn't matter anymore. I sold everything and returned to California. My champions needed me this time. I moved to LA to be closer to auditions while still being close enough to parents, 45 minutes without traffic. After this production of Music Man that you see here, I was forced to have unexpected ankle surgery. Desperate to make the cast of the West Coast premiere of Miss Saigon happen the following season, I did the surgery, I did my physical therapy, I auditioned, and they said yes. One of the most talented casts I've ever gotten to work with. On the first day of tumbling rehearsal, I went down. I went down hard. Prognosis? Back arthritis and a torn disc. Years of not listening to doctor's orders and thinking I was invincible had finally caught up with me. At 28, shift. I didn't have a choice. A decade of building a professional brand, gone, just like that. No time to waste, I immediately began looking for my next chapter. Thankfully, all those skills in New York transferred beautifully. I booked a marketing gig in construction, and within 6 months, Wall Street was calling again. I got the gig. I cleared my background test and was due to start in a week when I got another call back. More like the top secretary meeting with me privately to let me know who the real boss was. Yeah. As a performer, professional, union actor, I like to get paid for drama. I called my pops afterwards, kvetching, discouraged. He let me emotional barf for a little bit, and then he casually stated, "Come work with me." My dad was a flipper. My first memory of flipping houses was at around age 5, sucking cockroaches up with a vacuum all afternoon as my family was pulling old carpet up from a roach-infested house. I said yes. The family business had expanded to lending to flippers as well as investor training. Within the first year, we rebranded the company. We created a 400-page report with 800 charts called the California Crash, warning investors it was time to get out of California to escape the foreclosure crisis ahead. We then spent the next 12 months creating 1,200 pages of market strategies on what investors should be doing to thrive in the shifting market. We even launched a radio show in 2007, interviewing thought leaders across our industry while giving access to nerd status intel not typically available in our industry. In 2008, at the height of the Great Recession, I approached Dad with another brilliant idea. Hey, Pops, how about we invite 400 people to a black tie event at the Nixon Presidential Library? We'll feed them all. We'll put together an expert panel, and we'll pay for everything. So 100% of what we can raise goes to charity in honor of Mom. It's like dinner theater for real estate. He said yes. And so did our panelists. Our speakers progressively got more national in scope to include top technology brands and government officials. For a small company like ours, it was a huge coup. It was really surprising to watch how some of the skills I had picked up in New York transferred, some by sheer chance. It all began to pay off. I won't pretend that part was easy. There was certainly a sense of lingering failure from New York City, and there was definitely a sense of imposter syndrome. What right did I have to be part of some real estate business? Instead of focusing on the doubt, I dug in. I focused on learning. I went back and got my MBA at UC Irvine to up my data game. After graduation, my partner said, "Hey, why don't you start serving on boards?" Sounds great. I don't even know boards really do, but I'm here for it. I said Yes. Constantly looking to grow and to challenge myself. At one point, I was serving on 8 boards and committees that started all over the county and eventually the country. And I loved it. I had accidentally stumbled on a second passion I didn't even know existed a few years earlier: philanthropy. Who knew? I got to work with Pops, I got to give back in incredibly meaningful ways, and I got to be close to Mom. We even checked off some of the most spectacular international bucket list trips with her. After 17 years of fighting cancer, 6 of which were stage 4, my #1 champion passed. I want you to know, I never regret showing up for her and moving back to California. Not once. Quite the opposite. I am forever grateful. After Mom passed, I was inspired to update the mission of our business to building wealth and legacy through real estate. Helping small business owners crush it was already part of our niche. Adding the legacy piece, inspiring small businesses to give back, created a whole new fire under me and a unique path within our company. There's this terrible misconception that giving is strictly a function of money. But time and talent holds just as much value as treasure, sometimes more. You don't have to be wealthy, you don't have to be over 40, you don't even have to look a certain way, you just have to show up. That's it. You have to say yes. What surprised me the most is giving back actually gave back to me. I learned more about leadership in the last 15 years volunteering on boards than I did at work or any other formal education setting. This newfound passion turned into national speaking gigs, as well as writing for Forbes.com and several other national outlets. This is a magazine cover, Think Realty magazine, and they were nice enough to do a feature of Dad and I on their 2018 cover. We created I Survive Real Estate to give back and to honor my mom. I had zero idea it would take on a life of its own. 6 months ago when I agreed to do this talk, this is roughly where I would have stopped. Up in that top right corner is me moderating the panel in 2019 at I Survive Real Estate. On the stage is the CEO of Property Radar, Sean O'Toole. We only met because of this event, and we watched each other's work over the last decade. Long story short, as Vice President of Market Insights for Property Radar, I get to speak nationally, helping small businesses leverage data to disrupt disruptors and win by doing things Wall Street companies won't. And yes, of course, it always includes a little bit of local philanthropy. I continue to work remotely with the Norris Group, and I remain co-owner. And in a few days from when I'm taping this right now, we will be taping I Survive Real Estate 2020, now in its 13 years, and we are just about 30 grand away from crossing the $1 million mark. I would have never thought that that shy 3-year-old would have competed at the Broadway level. I didn't know my 28-year-old body would have given out and dashed my dreams. I had no idea playing a ball player and screwing up an audition would lead to a side hustle in New York that would eventually lead me to working for my family business. After coming out, I didn't think I would ever even move back to California. And nobody gave me the script showing me it was possible to find a second passion, and that philanthropy would be the gateway to writing, national speaking, and a career in technology. It's okay to not know where you're going. Please say yes to weird, to interesting, and to scary things. Collect and cherish your champions. Work to find opportunity in every disappointment. And please be generous with your time, your talent, and your treasure. At 43, I'm telling you the lyric is spot on. It's not where you start, it's where you finish. It's not how you go, it's how you land.
And now I would like to introduce to you John Torres. He is an MSJC professor who has been a professional archaeologist and anthropologist for more than 25 years. He has conducted research in Southern California, Central America, and Europe.
Thank you very much for coming. I'm glad to be here. Today's topic is going to be about awareness in Indian country. That's sort of what I'm going to be talking about. When I was first asked to do this talk, they said, oh, the theme is going to be awareness. And I thought, awareness, that just seems so big. What can I possibly do with something called awareness? But 6 months and one pandemic later, when I thought I'd come back and revisit this topic, and I said, what was that topic again? What's that theme? It's awareness. Awareness. Okay. Well, I'm more aware now of all kinds of stuff as a result of this pandemic and what's happened to everybody in the last 6 months, that I realized there's also lots of things in my head that I'm aware of as being part of Indian country and living and working in Indian country that other people just might not normally be aware of. And I thought, oh, I've got a stage. I can make you aware of these things. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about COVID. Let's talk about Native Americans, and let's talk about urban Native Americans. And I just kind of said, yeah, okay. In the Native vernacular, studis. So what are we aware of now that's different than maybe 6 months ago? One of them, the simple term, is the pandemic. Pandemic is something we may have heard of. If you're a history major or had a history class, you heard about the Spanish flu, that was a pandemic. But most of us know what epidemics are. We have all kinds of epidemics. We're trying to keep from having epidemics. But now kindergartners know what the word pandemic means. I didn't when I was in kindergarten, but that's just me. So, and then even something like a virus. We know about viruses, with smallpox virus and HIV virus and chickenpox and you name it, all kinds of viruses. But unless you actually look at, disinfectant labels from here and there, you would never have heard of the word coronavirus. We all know coronavirus now. We know particularly the one that causes COVID, the one that causes the coronavirus disease of 2019. It's something none of us are ever going to forget, no matter how old you are right now. Even something like a simple word like quarantine. We all know what quarantine is. Quarantine means you have to be locked up. You have to be separated from everybody else for a while. We've all seen that movie where the guy comes in the airlock with the alien stuck to his face, and the doctors are saying, don't let him in. He needs to be in quarantine. And of course, they let him in, and a whole monster movie comes out of that. But that's quarantine. Even something simple like software like Zoom. Zoom is kind of a software meant for business to have face-to-face meetings without having to travel from distances. We're all learning from Zoom. We're all teaching from Zoom. Zoom has become a verb for us. It's all about talking and communicating with each other in this virtual kind of new environment. Zoom is part of our vernacular. It's part of our lexicon. It's part of our daily language these days. And then in the world of academia, we use the term disproportionate impact. In the world of equity and diversity between faculty members and administrators, we talk about how certain students, our African American male students, are disproportionately impacted compared to the Latin American students or Indigenous American students, or whatever it might be. That's a term we used in academia for that. But now we're all aware of disproportionate impact in terms of how COVID is impacting our communities. African American communities have been hit really hard by this virus. Well, in terms of per capita, Indian country has even been hit harder, really hard. So at 27%, that's a lot of people. American Indians at 34% are disproportionately impacted by this virus. Some of you might even be aware of what's happened on the Navajo Nation. We got national coverage. Even Fox News did a bit on us. CNN did a bit on us. Navajo Nation, where I'm from, is 300 million people living on one reservation. It is the most highly infectious rate of any other community in the entire country. In the entire world, for that matter. Despite the quarantines, despite the curfews, there was a curfew from sundown on Friday to sunup on Monday. There's a curfew from sundown every day of the week. It's been a big deal. It's finally getting better, but it's been pretty tough. And if you might wonder, you might be wondering, why are even natives so disproportionately impacted? Why do viruses hit their communities harder than anybody else? Why are they more susceptible to things like COVID or some of these other viruses? Well, it comes down to something like this. It's sort of a historic phenomenon with different cultures and different people around the world living with their animals. Europeans have been living with their animals for a very long time. Their cows, their horses, their goats, their sheep, their pigs, all those kinds of things. And as a result, we catch what we call zoonotic diseases. We catch animal diseases and become a human version of these things. There are no domesticated animals like that in the entire Western Hemisphere. They just don't exist. There's llamas and there's turkeys and there's an iguana and maybe cochineal and guinea pigs. There's a few domesticated animals here, but nothing on the scale of cows or pigs or chickens or camels or these kinds of big animals that people lived with. So there are no zoonotic diseases that human beings catch here. It just doesn't happen. But if you do live with your animals, you can catch anthrax from your cows. You can catch smallpox from your horses. You can catch influenza of all kinds from your chickens. And you can catch all kinds of things, including bubonic plague from the fleas that feed on all these animals, even your pets. This is a population that gets exposed to these diseases more often, and therefore they develop a greater immunity to these diseases. If you're from a population that doesn't get exposed to these, then your body doesn't have any reason to develop antibodies for something you're never exposed to. And that's part of the mechanism that happened. People here have just less of an immunity. And there's two types of immunity. There's what we call innate immunity. Innate immunity, and I'm not going to get into the technical aspects of it, but basically what it is, it's your ability to even recognize a pathogen. So whether or not you actually have a virus or a bacteria that's gotten into your bloodstream, your body recognizes it as a foreign body and does something about it. We actually have special cells that look for these things in our body. So that's called innate ability, just the ability to recognize that you have some kind of pathogen. Europeans, because they're living with their animals, have much greater exposure to all kinds of other diseases and therefore have a greater sense of pathogen recognition. And then there's acquired immunity. Acquired immunity is what you get when you get exposed to a disease, a flu or a cold or even chickenpox. You're not born with innate abilities against chickenpox. You catch chickenpox and then you don't catch it again, hopefully. Or if you get a vaccine, you get a tiny exposure to it. That's called acquired immunity. You trigger those antibodies to do something to help fight off diseases. So between the innate immunity and acquired immunity, Native North Americans and South Americans had evolved a different set of mechanisms by which to deal with those things. Basically, they've reduced the number of leukocytes, the abilities to recognize disease, than other populations. European, African, or even Asian populations don't have more of these acquired and innate immune systems. And it's purely an accident. It's an artifact of the settling of the Western Hemisphere in general. The reduction in gene frequency, the reduction in immunological responses occurs as a result of the bottleneck effect. In other words, smaller populations came over from Asia, whether they came over from Siberia or whether they came over through Polynesia. It's still a small population that settled the hemisphere. And with them, they brought a smaller immunological response mechanisms. And since they were no longer exposed to these things, there was no need to develop any more diversity in that. So you fast forward about 20,000 years and you get a huge diversity of cultures, a huge diversity of languages and people and traditions without necessarily changing the immunology of all these people in the hemisphere. Were you aware in 1491 that there were about 120 million indigenous people living in North and South America? That's about 1/5 of the world's population at the time. That's huge. And after contact, as a result of that reduced immunological response, 100 million people passed away as a result of exposure to disease. And the Spanish brought it. They're not guilty. They didn't do it on purpose. They didn't know what germs were. But they are responsible because they did bring it. And to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about, I mean, COVID's been pretty bad. Over 200,000 people have died as a result of COVID. But in the scale of the 15th century, imagine 1.2 billion people dying as a result of COVID. That's the kind of scale we're talking about when 1/5 of the world's population dies from one pandemic. That's huge. But given all that 500 years of stuff that's happened in Native America, I want to emphasize we are still here. We haven't gone anywhere yet. Are you aware of the fact that we are represented by about 600 sovereign nations within the United States? 600 separate reservations that are treated as sovereign nations. We actually have treaties with the states and the federal government. We don't have MOUs, we don't have contracts. We actually have treaties like France and South Korea and Vietnam. We are a sovereign nation within the United States. So all these blue dots equal sovereign nations within the United States, including the really big blue one there, which is Navajo Nation. Indigenous America today is about 6 million people. We've gone from 120 million, today's population about 6 million people, which is about 2% of the US's population. But are you aware of the fact that only about 22% of us live on reservations? People think, oh, Indians all live in reservations. Not true. In fact, 60% of us actually live in urban centers. So that means about 3.6 million people live in Chicago and New York and LA and all these big urban centers. Like lots of other people, move to the cities, leaving only a small percentage of folks that still live out on reservations. We call ourselves urban Indians. That's what we are. Like rural America in the 19th century, we moved to the big cities. Sometimes there was government policies that helped push us that way, which is another TED Talk altogether. But the reality is that urban Indians now actually make up the majority of all Indian people in this country. Yes, there's still a lot of people living on reservations, but they're small in comparison. So, we're all around you. You might not even realize it. And if you meet someone and say, hey, I'm Bob Smith, they don't say, I'm Bob Smith, I'm Irish. We don't identify our tribal entity either, usually. But if you look carefully, you realize we're leaving an imprint everywhere. We have our health centers, we have our public art centers, we have our training centers in urban cities, in downtown urban areas, whether it be Seattle or Chicago or LA or New York. We practice our ceremony, our traditional religions, out on the streets in the middle of the city because while it might be ideal to be in the canyon or the river or the stream, we do it in the concrete jungle because that's where we live now. And that's okay, it seems to work. You go downtown and you might have a round dance just pop up, just as part of some kind of religious ceremony that's coming up. Maybe Indigenous Peoples Day, maybe California Indian Peoples Day, something like that. You can find us everywhere in urban cities. You can even find us in Washington, D.C., where we have our own representatives in Washington, D.C. So I want to say, look around. Our beauty, our culture, everything that makes us us is all around you, and you might not even realize it until you look carefully. We're out there doing this, fighting the same battle you are. We're fighting COVID. We're trying to keep safe. We're trying to wear our masks. But we're also expressing ourselves and living in Native America in this very 21st century place. Whether you're an artist from Tulsa, an artist from Seattle, an artist from Sacramento, San Francisco, or Raisin Hill in Chicago, skating in Phoenix, American Indian people are still very much here. So now you are aware that despite the genocide, despite the government policies, despite all these things, in fact, in spite of COVID itself, many of us wake up every morning and say, today's a good day to be Indigenous. Thank you.
And now I would like to introduce you to Sergeant Major Greg Coker and Honorable Judge Mark Johnson. Sergeant Major Greg Coker, an Army veteran who retired after 26 years of service. He is the CEO, co-founder of the Reaching New Heights Foundation, founded in 2014 to help veterans reconnect with society. Honorable Judge Mark Johnson is an Army and Army Reserves veteran who now serves as a Riverside County Superior Court judge.
Hello, my name is Mark Johnson and I am a California Superior Court judge. For 7 years, I have had the privilege of presiding over the Riverside County Veterans Treatment Court. In this position, I've been on the front lines of the fight to heal our American veterans of trauma they've suffered while in uniform. This is trauma inflicted by foreign enemies and, sadly, also trauma inflicted by our own military personnel. We serve justice-involved veterans who are facing criminal charges. We are here to discuss something we witness in our courtroom, but let me first describe our court. A Veterans Treatment Court is a collaborative court. It's a treatment court, hence the name. I chair a team of attorneys and mental health professionals whose sole mission is to work together, or collaboratively, to heal veterans suffering from the invisible wounds of military service. Most of these wounds are the result of horrible things that they've witnessed or experienced in combat. The wounds are mental, emotional. I'm responsible for making the final decision on what treatment the veteran will receive and ensuring that veteran gets that treatment. I was selected for this position because I'm a retired colonel of the United States Army. I spent 28 years in the active and reserve armies, including a year in Baghdad, Iraq. Now, I didn't mention probably the most important member of our team to heal our veterans, our mentors. And with me is retired Army Command Sergeant Major Gregory Coker. He oversees our mentor program.
I am Greg Coker, Mentor Coordinator for Riverside and San Bernardino Counties Veterans Treatment Court. I served 26 years in the United States Army, 2 tours in Iraq, and received a Bronze Star. The mentor program is an essential part of the veteran's recovery and transition back into society as a successful citizen. The mentor's role is to engage, impact, and empower veterans. Mentors are knowledgeable veterans who listen, guide, and are friends, battle buddies. Mentors volunteer to help their veteran brothers and sisters in need. Mentors understand the challenges facing our women veterans. I am here to shed light on a topic too few people are aware of. In April of this year, a 20-year-old U.S. Army soldier went missing at Fort Hood, Texas. Her name was Private First Class Vanessa Guillen. Shortly before she disappeared, Vanessa told her parents that she was being sexually harassed by soldiers in her unit. 2 months later, her remains were found by a construction crew. Specialist Aaron Robinson, a soldier in her unit, confessed to a civilian that he had beaten Vanessa to death with a hammer inside the unit's armory. Vanessa's murder is a classic case of military sexual trauma. It was a breaking point with many Americans. It was a breaking point of Congress discussed with a military that cannot get a handle on a serious issue. As Jane Harmon, a 9-time congressional representative from California, has said, a female soldier in Iraq is more likely to be raped by a fellow soldier than killed by enemy fire. Too many of our sisters in arms are being mistreated, often sexually, and our military is not doing enough to protect them. And the problem is compounded because a few women who do choose to speak up, more than likely their complaints discounted or dismissed. These ladies took the same oath as their male counterparts. They swore to fight and protect the nation, to the point of giving their lives if necessary. Yet, they, victims, are suffering trauma at the hands of their military comrades.
We're not actually here to suggest fixes to the active military. That is, we have absolutely no control over that. But we can treat the trauma suffered by our women veterans and criminal behavior that results from that trauma. So, why are we, 2 males, discussing this issue? You know, I thought at first that we shouldn't, that a woman should present this talk, that the 2 of us weren't the right speakers because we're men. But in fact, we must speak. Males preside over 2/3 of the courtrooms in this country. This is a serious problem. If we don't speak, who will?
Women are assuming an ever-larger role in our nation's defense. At the same time, the overall size of the military is shrinking. Let's talk about the changing face of our military. In 1970, during the Vietnam War, there were 3 million Americans on active duty. Women were approximately 1.5% of our active duty personnel, or around 40,000. By 1980, the active duty military has shrunk to 2 million troops. Yet, during that same period, the percentage of women's service on active duty increased to 9% of the active duty, or roughly 180,000. As of today, 1,350,000 serve on active duty in the military, the significant reduction since Vietnam. The percentage of women has risen to 18%. 250,000 women serve on active duty. 10% of the American veterans, or around 2 million veterans, are women. That percentage will increase over the coming decades. Yet, despite these dramatic increases, many people do not associate women with being veterans. The veteran stereotype exists that soldiers and veterans are men.
Veterans treatment courts, like ours, exist to meet the unique needs of veterans. But what this stereotyping translates to in practice is that women veterans are being missed for treatment that could be individually tailored to address mental health and physical conditions resulting from their service, Law enforcement and jailers do not ask women upon arrest if they've served in the military. Judges and attorneys often don't ask either. So that brings us to the first area we need to address to help our women veterans in the criminal justice system, identifying them as veterans. We don't ask, "Are you a veteran?" Some people may not believe they are veterans, and it could be because they didn't serve in combat or they have a bad discharge. You should ask one simple question: have you ever served in the military?
Once we identify our veterans, assessment of a veteran is critical to developing a treatment plan. Let's talk about 3 most common diagnoses women suffer from as a result of their military service: depression, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder. The most common of these is PTSD. Studies have found that anywhere from 9 to 30% of combat veterans are affected by PTSD. Normal to veterans with PTSD is seeing terrifying images that are not theirs. Veterans' relationships, employment, and health fall apart. To alleviate these symptoms, veterans often turn to alcohol, methamphetamines, and other drugs. These short-term solutions do not work and often land them in court.
But these PTSD numbers become significantly skewed upwards when we look only at our woman veterans. Statistically, women suffer from PTSD related to combat about the same as our male veterans. But factoring in the issue of military sexual trauma, the levels of women veterans suffering from PTSD is far higher. The level of PTSD among women veterans of military sexual trauma is as high as 60%. Let me repeat that, 60%. Military sexual trauma is the term used by the VA, the Veterans Administration, to refer to experiences of sexual assault or repeated threatening sexual harassment that a veteran experienced during military service.
Sexual violence against women is pervasive in our military, despite the efforts of the Department of Defense to fight the problem. Take a look at this chart. While military sexual trauma comprise both of sexual assault and severe sexual harassment, these statistics are purely for sexual assault and does not include sexual harassment aspects. The numbers are rising. The blue column represents actual reports of sexual assault. But given 2/3 of the victims do not report, to the DOD's estimate is much higher. That is the orange column. Since 2016, the rates are increasing dramatically. After they leave active duty, 25% of the women seeking treatment at the VA state that they were victims of sexual trauma, 1 in 4.
A woman I will refer to as Carla, and that's not her real name, once stood before me charged with felony thefts. Inspired by her father, she had enlisted in the Army at age 18. She was 19 when 3 men in her military police unit raped her. She reported it to her commander, but he believed the males, who claimed it was a consensual 3-on-1 orgy. Ostracized, she began drinking heavily to relieve her depression. Her job performance fell. 8 months later, she was discharged. Standing before me in court, Carla looked tired and beaten. She looked older than her age of 35 years. Bitter from her military experience, she had turned to methamphetamine after leaving service, which is a common form of self-medication for people suffering from PTSD. I placed her on probation, where she was treated for depression, PTSD, and military sexual trauma. About 5 to 10% of the veteran defendants in my court at any given time are women. But based on my experience, the absolute vast majority of these women have been the victims of military sexual harassment. It's close to 100%.
This brings us to our next point. All veterans should be screened for a history of sexual harassment and assault or military sexual trauma. How do we screen? The simple answer is to ask, but the discussion must be completed in a supportive environment. Women who was raped on active duty, who is depressed, anxious, and cannot stop using drugs, who views herself as a failure, is not going to suddenly open up and tell anything to a guy in a black robe in a crowded courtroom. The screening for sexual military trauma should be approached with a female therapist in a compassionate and sensitive manner.
I think it's really important as well how judges approach the people that stand before them, the veterans. In our court, we don't label veterans as criminals or losers. We view their crimes as health problems. I tell the veterans before me that when I look at them, I see heroes, heroes who've stumbled, brothers and sisters in arms who need help. If a veteran requests treatment for military sexual trauma, we provide it. Our services are based on substantial research about what helps sexual trauma survivors recover. Women therapists generally provide the treatment to other women, and I strongly recommend that. This is tough therapy. It depends on being able to relive, to talk about what actually happened in probably one of the most traumatic times in a person's life. But despite its devastating impact, it is possible for those who experience military sexual trauma to heal. The treatment works, resulting in a significant reduction in PTSD and depression. I remember the last time I talked to Carla, she was 18 months clean and sober. She laughed and smiled, but she always just seemed a little sad to me.
We love this country. We are proud to serve this nation. We are grateful to continue in the service of our fellow veterans. Yet, the plight of our sister veterans is unacceptable. We are doing what we can to help our female veterans heal. Critical to that effort is our Veterans Court.
So we hope you got something out of this. Our theme today was awareness of this issue. You may not have known that women are a significant portion of our military. Now you are. You may not have known that a Veterans Treatment Court exists. Now you are aware. And you may not have known that military sexual trauma affects 1/4 of female veterans. And that I sincerely hope you are aware and could take that away from watching this. With this awareness comes the opportunity for healing. Healing for those who've been traumatized in unimaginable ways. Help us spread this awareness, and with that, help us spread healing. Thank you.
Thank you.
There have been many revolutions over the last century, but perhaps none as significant as the longevity revolution. We are living, on average today, 34 years longer than our great-grandparents did. Think about that. That's an entire second adult lifetime that's been added to our lifespan. And yet, for the most part, our culture has not come to terms with what this means. We're still living with the old paradigm of age as an arch. That's the metaphor, the old metaphor. You're born, you peak at midlife, and decline into decrepitude. Age as pathology. But many people today, philosophers, artists, doctors, scientists, are taking a new look at what I call the third act, the last 3 decades of life. They realize that this is actually a developmental stage of life with its own significance, as different from midlife as adolescence is from childhood. And they are asking, we should all be asking, how do we use this time? How do we live it successfully? What is the appropriate new metaphor for aging? I've spent the last year researching and writing about this subject, and I have come to find that a more appropriate metaphor for aging is a staircase, the upward ascension of the human spirit, bringing us into wisdom, wholeness, and authenticity. Age not at all as pathology, age as potential. And guess what? This potential is not for the lucky few. It turns out most people over 50 feel better, are less stressed, less hostile, less anxious. We tend to see commonalities more than differences. Some of the studies even say we're happier. This is not what I expected, trust me. I come from a long line of depressives. As I was approaching my late 40s, when I would wake up in the morning, my first 6 thoughts would all be negative. And I got scared. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to become a crotchety old lady. But now that I am actually smack dab in the middle of my own third act, I realize I've never been happier. I have such a powerful feeling of well-being. And I've discovered that when you're inside oldness, as opposed to looking at it from the outside, fear subsides. You realize you're still yourself, maybe even more so. You know, Picasso once said, it takes a long time to become young. I don't want to romanticize aging. Obviously, there's no guarantee that it can be a time of fruition and growth. Some of it is a matter of luck. Some of it, obviously, is genetic. 1/3 of it, in fact, is genetic, and there isn't much we can do about that. But that means that 2/3 of how well we do in the third act, we can do something about. We're going to discuss what we can do to make these added years really successful and use them to make a difference. Now, let me say something about the staircase, which may seem like an odd metaphor for seniors, given the fact that many seniors are challenged by stairs, myself included. As you may know, the entire world operates on a universal law, entropy, the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy means that everything in the world, everything is in a state of decline and decay, the arch. There's only one exception to this universal law, and that is the human spirit, which can continue to evolve upwards, the staircase, bringing us into wholeness, authenticity, and wisdom. And here's an example of what I mean. This upward ascension can happen even in the face of extreme physical challenges. About 3 years ago, I read an article in the New York Times. It was about a man named Neil Selinger, 57 years old, a retired lawyer, who had joined the writers group at Sarah Lawrence, where he found his writer's voice. 2 years later, he was diagnosed with ALS, commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease. It's a terrible disease. It's fatal. It wastes the body, but the mind remains intact. In this article, Mr. Selinger wrote the following to describe what was happening to him. And I quote, "As my muscles weakened, my writing became stronger. As I slowly lost my speech, I gained my voice. As I diminished, I grew. As I lost so much, I finally started to find myself." Neil Selinger, to me, is the embodiment of mounting the staircase in his third act. Now, we're all born with spirit, all of us, but sometimes it gets tamped down beneath the challenges of life, violence, abuse, neglect. Perhaps our parents suffered from depression. Perhaps they weren't able to love us beyond how we performed in the world. Perhaps we still suffer from a psychic pain, a wound. Perhaps we feel that many of our relationships have not had closure, and so we can feel unfinished. Perhaps the task of the third act is to finish up the task of finishing ourselves. For me, it began as I was approaching my third act, my 60th birthday. How was I supposed to live it? What was I supposed to accomplish in this final act? And I realized that in order to know where I was going, I had to know where I'd been. And so I went back and I studied my first 2 acts, trying to see who I was then, who I really was, not who my parents or other people told me I was, or treated me like I was, but who was I? Who were my parents? Not as parents, but as people. Who were my grandparents? How did they treat my parents? These kinds of things. I discovered a couple of years later that this process that I had gone through is called by psychologists doing a life review, and they say it can give new significance and clarity and meaning to a person's life. You may discover, as I did, that a lot of things that you used to think were your fault, a lot of things that you used to think about yourself, really had nothing to do with you. It wasn't your fault. You're just fine. And you're able to go back and forgive them and forgive yourself. You're able to free yourself from your past. You can work to change your relationship to your past. Now, while I was writing about this, I came upon a book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a German psychiatrist who'd spent 5 years in a Nazi concentration camp. And he wrote that while he was in the camp, he could tell, should they ever be released, which of the people would be okay and which would not. And he wrote this: everything you have in life can be taken from you except one thing: your freedom to choose how you will respond to the situation. This is what determines the quality of the life we've lived, not whether we've been rich or poor, famous or unknown, healthy or suffering. What determines our quality of life is how we relate to these realities, what kind of meaning we assign them, what kind of attitude we cling to about them, what state of mind we allow them to trigger. Perhaps the central purpose of the third act is to go back and to try, if appropriate, to change our relationship to the past. It turns out that cognitive research shows when we are able to do this, it manifests neurologically. Neural pathways are created in the brain. You see, if you have, over time, reacted negatively to past events and people, neural pathways are laid down by chemical and electrical signals that are sent through the brain. And over time, these neural pathways become hardwired. They become the norm, even if it's bad for us because it causes us stress and anxiety. If, however, we can go back and alter our relationship, revision our relationship to past people and events, neural pathways can change. And if we can maintain the more positive feelings about the past, that becomes the new norm. It's like resetting a thermostat. You know, it's not having experiences that make us wise. It's reflecting on the experiences that we've had that makes us wise and that helps us become whole, brings wisdom and authenticity. It helps us become what we might have been. Women start off whole, don't we? I mean, as girls, we're feisty. Yeah, who says? We have agency. We are the subjects of our own lives. But very often, many if not most of us, when we hit puberty, we start worrying about fitting in and being popular. And we become the subjects and objects of other people's lives. But now, in our third acts, it may be possible for us to circle back to where we started and know it for the first time. And if we can do that, it will not just be for ourselves. Older women are the largest demographic in the world. If we can go back and redefine ourselves and become whole, this will create a cultural shift in the world, and it will give an example to younger generations so that they can reconceive their own lifespan. Thank you very much. Thank you.
At this point, we'll be taking a brief intermission. I'd like to bring back our MC, who will introduce our musical guest.
Our musical guest has been a music educator for over 35 years. He is the founder of the jazz program at Idlewild Arts Academy. He's the former bassist of the Miles Davis Quintet and the co-founder of Jazz in the Pines Jazz Festival in Idlewild, California. Please help me give a warm welcome to the very, very talented Marshall Hawkins.
Why do we need art? Why? Well, it's relatively silly. That is, in my mind's eye. You know, art comes under the auspices of love. Because art, it's a gift. It's a gift from God. It's like the human voice, which is the perfect instrument, which is God-made. Unlike the contrabass that I just played, is man-made. But it depends on how much love there is when it comes to people in general. Love is the most important thing. And art is the one thing that exudes love. Think about the song I just played, Softly as in a Morning Sunrise. Well, that's love. That's the way unconditional love feels to me. The artists, so many centuries ago, have left us treasures of all kinds: visual, music, dance. Speaking of dance, you've always heard this sarcastic statement sometimes. Oh, you, a song and a dance. Well, the reality is, a song and a dance is the one thing that will display the inner feelings and emotions of a culture. You want to know about a culture? Listen to them sing, watch them dance. It's there. So art, again, comes in so many different forms, but it's still love. It's still reduced to its lowest terms, love. Now, when I was a very young man, and I'll say that, young man, at age 7, because I felt like I was a little man. That's what I was told I was. Come on, little man, let's go and listen to Lionel Hampton and Louis Armstrong. Yes, I was blessed. Washington, D.C. had some of the best music anywhere in the world. Principally, it was the home of Duke Ellington. So by the time I was 7, I had heard all this music live. So here I am, not having the foggiest idea the value of art, but I'm still internalizing this wonderful treasure that we have known as art. As I grew, then I started to explore when it comes to art, and I spent so much time in the Smithsonian, the old brick building, the old brick Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., every Sunday. And then it just kept evolving, my love of this art of all kinds. And lo and behold, when I was 16 or so, after having played the piano and the drums, I learned to play the organ. That changed everything for me. I wasn't sure about even being a professional musician. I just enjoyed the music. I enjoyed being this conduit of this energy known as music, which is an art form all to itself. And learning to play the organ actually confirmed my feelings about how I was raised, and I was raised in the church. But I was able to be a one-man orchestra. And that was pretty amazing, to look in the faces of people when you're actually making music and you're bringing joy to their lives. It's magic doesn't even come close to the word. It's not the most applicable word. It's that gift. It's that gift again, where when you recognize the fact that you can humble yourself to play music and be this conduit to the people. You see, that's why art is so important. Okay, sure, we have a lot of cultures that will capitalize on it in so many different ways, financially, so forth and so on and so on. But the musicians have become wiser. The artists have become wiser, where they can take control of the business aspects of this art. Well, a lot of the people that are receiving this art, they're not aware of all of this that's happening in the background, but it's still art. Still exudes to me love. And I can't imagine being a human being on this planet without art. And it has nothing to do with the fact that I'm a musician. It's just that how could we exist as human beings without art? This art, the treasures are still being found. The earth is opening and revealing treasures that have never been found. Art. I like to sing. Without music, the world would be flat. Oh, pardon the pun. That's the blues, B flat. Oh, yeah, right. Well, a true artist knows how to use other breathing and living things as a barometer to measure the quality of his art. It's kind of a far-fetched statement, but in San Diego, the aquarium had music, and we played jazz, all acoustic instruments. And it was just wonderful for all of those living beings in the water, just on the other side there. They brought in electronic music and played, and some of those animals died. So we're dealing with art. When you say art, art is the purest form. Art gives life, it does not take it. That's why we need art. Remember, it gives life. It doesn't take it. And those of us who are artists must, by all means, assume this identity and this personality of selflessness. It's not about us. We're just mere conduits of this energy. And once we accept that position, then we will not have a problem telling the truth, which that's what art is all about, telling the truth. It reflects history. It reflects current events. It records so much. But the one I like is, no doubt, love is the one. And in closing, I would just like to say that if we can all recognize art as being such a beautiful place to be, whether you are the giver or the recipient, art is the secret. Art is the secret to quality of life. Thank you very much.
Welcome Angelica Anderson, who will introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Bianca. We would now like to introduce to you Dr. Terry Horton, a workforce futurist, artificial intelligence business strategist, and founder of Future Path LLC.
When I think about navigating the unfolding of the future of work, a GPS system comes to mind. A system that can get me where I need to go and where I need to be in the future, even if the path, road, or highway isn't clear or fully uploaded yet. You see, my thoughts about GPS and the future of work are rooted in the fact that I'm a Californian, born and raised, So like most Californians, I drive a lot. In fact, I can easily traverse 3 counties, 4 to 5 freeways, a toll road, and a new highway, literally in one day. In fact, I have 3 GPS apps on my phone and GPS embedded in my watch and my car. But, I'm a futurist, so I'm always looking for signs and signals to navigate the path forward. So it makes sense. You see, I'm a workforce futurist, and my expertise sits at the intersection of the future of work and artificial intelligence and its impact on organizations and people. I help leaders move through future of work strategies, and most importantly, people strategies aimed at humanizing the worker experience. I also coach executives that are leveling up and reinventing to develop future-focused leadership brands. So if you think about it, I serve as their GPS system for successfully navigating the unfolding of the future of work. Just as I use GPS to navigate my journeys across California, they want to know the number of route options, the number of miles to get there, how long it will take to arrive at their destination, and they want to be alerted of any detours, roadblocks, or other activities that might impede their path or prevent them from arriving at the right destination. And in the event of a dreaded SIG alert, they want to know how to access new lanes, accelerate around curves, and quickly access highways and exchanges to not only arrive on time, but also to bypass the congestion of competitors. Now, those of us that study the future of work knew that the most significant transformation would happen between 2020 and 2025 and would normalize around 2027. We knew the decade would be driven by Industry 4.0 technologies like the Internet of Things, AI, machine learning, virtual reality, and others. And that as the lines between technology and reality became more blurred, how we work, live, and play would be forever transformed. In an organizational context, we knew it was about combining data, technology, and people in game-changing ways to drive exponential growth. More importantly, we knew that no industry or role would go unscathed, and that most workers would need to upskill or be reprogrammed, if you will, to navigate the path forward. We also know that workers would need to be adaptive, agile, innovative, in order to work side by side with machines and robots and algorithms, and to reimagine careers, reskill, and to keep up with the pace of change. We also knew that emotional intelligence would become critically important to employers because the future of work is human. It's collaborative, multicultural, multi-generational, empathetic, and focused on worker experience. We knew EQ would also be important to employers because it enables workers to understand themselves as well as others. And it lays the foundation for the awareness and resilience that's needed to manage change, adapt to new technologies, structural shifts, remote work, human-machine relationships, and to thrive in complexity and uncertainty. Now, of course, what we didn't know about the future of work was that 2020 would usher in a worldwide pandemic that would accelerate the future of work by nearly a decade. Nearly a decade. And that most of the disruptive acceleration would take place within the first few months of the pandemic. Let's just pause there for a moment. We literally experienced nearly a decade's worth of growth and transformation in a matter of months. We did that. For most organizations navigating the disruption of COVID-19, resilience planning was at the forefront of organizational continuity, developing new business and operating models, creating new ecosystems, and fast-tracking digital transformation and remote work. Think about these examples. COVID-19 accelerated the move to telehealth in healthcare, the move to remote learning in colleges and universities, the growth of e-commerce, and it fast-forwarded the touchless economy. We watched as hotels, in response to downturns in domestic travel and the increase in remote work, rent out rooms as office space, not only in response to social distancing and the work-life balance demands of professionals, but also to create new revenue streams for the future. We watched breweries and distilleries shift from manufacturing alcohol to hand sanitizer. We watched companies re-engineer supply chains. And we watched companies adopt AI platforms at a faster pace to manage the productivity of remote workers. And people of all stripes became side-hustling creators of masks and PPE. Each of these examples are underpinned by EQ. It took EQ to think out of the box and to be adaptive, creative, and innovative in the midst of crisis. Now, going back to the GPS model for navigating the future of work, as we move through our COVID-adjusted future and its impact on work, jobs, and careers, it becomes clear that the GPS system that guided us in the past now needs a programming upgrade. It needs to be reprogrammed with EQ. And furthermore, instead of residing on an app or in a vehicle or on a watch, it needs to be easily activated as if it were embedded in our own bodies so that we can intuitively drive through the new normal of this accelerated unfolding. When we reflect back on some of our own experiences as workers during the first half of 2020, think about the power of self-awareness and resilience. If you remember, we experienced unprecedented unemployment, lived through furloughs, reduced salaries, engaged in rapid upskilling, and many workers experienced increased stress, depression, anxiety, fear, and even loneliness. And as workers migrated from the office to work from home, many worked longer hours, suffered from feelings of always being on, and experienced a new level of vulnerability by exposing how they lived to their colleagues and managers through the lens of video meeting platforms. Yet we persisted. Yes, we persisted. As you reflect on these experiences, you can begin to conceptualize how the need for emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and resilience took center stage, and why we need it as we continue to move through some of our current and future work realities. While we may not experience another pandemic and the economic impact that ensued in this decade, we will need emotional intelligence to manage through change, uncertainty, and to catalyze creativity, innovation, and growth. As we continue to journey through the future of work with this recalibrated GPS system that lets us know where we are and where we're going, remember, it's the IQ in the system that outlines the route. So we, without a doubt, absolutely need the IQ capabilities. However, the EQ embedded in the system will allow us to be more flexible, resilient, manage ambiguity, be empathetic, human-centered, develop a growth mindset, and see the world more realistically so that we can make the right decisions. You see, the EQ in the GPS will provide the sensing we need to guide our thinking and behavior as we hit toll roads, detours, or must negotiate the on-ramps and off-ramps of the new next so that we're agile enough to shift, pivot, and respond. It will enable us to harness the power of resilience, to enter freeway on-ramps and exit on-ramps, even if we remember getting a speeding ticket or having a fender bender in the past on those very same freeways. You want to know why? I want to know why we'll be able to do this. Because we'll be able to look into the rear view mirror of our lives to access and download the data that reminds us of our strength and grit and how we overcame in the past when we were redirected to a new route or were met with detours or even road closures. EQ will enable us to download the data from our COVID-altered work experiences to remind us of how we shifted from performing in the office to being productive working from home, appearing on stage daily on video meeting platforms, and surviving video platform fatigue that challenged our well-being. All of this while maintaining productivity levels and balancing a myriad of competing personal priorities. Yes, we did that. Indeed, we did. Through self-awareness, we'll also be able to tap into the power of our own prior experiences, of learning new skills, new systems, processes. And I'm not saying that we'll do this without trepidation. What I am saying is that in spite of trepidation, we will be certain that as we move through the unfolding of the future of work, that we'll be able to successfully acquire and leverage the new skills and processes as we reimagine work. Let me tell you more about EQ. EQ will enable us to understand when to be flexible, shift into overdrive, and be transformed as we traverse the roads and highways of the future of work and shift from automated to cognitive systems that enable us to do the work of the future while leveraging digital fluency, decision-making, and even empathy needed to work alongside and in between, by the way, the robots, machines, and algorithms that will amplify our work. Now, let me be clear. COVID-19 absolutely had its unique set of hardships, challenges, and pain. But we learned that we are more resilient than we ever imagined, just like most organizations did. Organizations were forced to respond in new ways, and most adapted better than they imagined. They reacted, responded, and reemerged, focused on thriving on the path forward, not on recalibrating for the past. We can do the same. In fact, we must do the same. As we shift into the path forward, this upgraded GPS system that's loaded with EQ will guide us as it maps, tracks, and navigates old roads and new paths that are paved with AI, innovation, and new skill combinations, and reimagined organizations, workplaces, and jobs. This EQ will enable us to cultivate and tap into self-awareness and resilience so that we can easily activate our internal GPS system to mindfully adapt to rapid organizational change, bounce back after setbacks, and have the grit to pivot, reskill, and level up over and over again. As a futurist, I am really excited about the unfolding of the future of work and all that it will bring to when, where, why, and how we work. It'll be different. It'll be transformative, but full of possibilities. Business models and processes will be re-engineered, and AI will continue to replace routine work and tasks so that we can focus on higher level work, more meaningful work that's aligned with our passions and interests, and that enables us to solve new business problems and societal challenges. We will absolutely need IQ to accomplish this. Now, to be clear, the new recalibrated GPS system that guides us must be embedded with both IQ and EQ. In fact, the future demands it of all of us. Yes, all of us, from coders to accountants, to marketers, data scientists, to sales reps, to HR managers, and every role in between. We will need this new recalibrated GPS system that's heavily programmed with EQ to support a human-centered focus, which is at the heart of the future of work. Combining both will have a significant impact on how and when we arrive at our future destination. Some of the latest research on the future of work indicates that some of us will arrive at new and exciting destinations like data detective, personal environment designer, ethical sourcing officer, machine-man teaming manager, personal memory curator, augmented reality journey builder, or even genetic diversity officer. I want you to know that the future of work is exciting and full of possibilities if we leverage our EQ to envision and build the future that we want. And by doing so, this new system will provide us with the right mapping to connect the dots of our passions and purpose, to solve new problems, catalyze possibilities, and reinvent ourselves to create a new future. What I know is that the COVID-altered future of work will continue to evolve faster. It will be more remote, more on demand, more collaborative, inclusive, and human. And that our work will largely be augmented and amplified by machines. And our EQ will be one of our most dynamic differentiators. I also know that as the future of work continues to unfold, that we must design our own careers and futures. We will all navigate the new path forward together as the future of work continues to unfold. And we can do this if we let EQ guide us. I'll leave you with a few thoughts and advantages. Number one, make sure you download and activate your new recalibrated personal GPS for the path forward. Two, let your EQ transform your mindset so that you embrace change, continuous learning, and you seek out inspiration and become more creative than you've ever been. And that believing that doing the work really pays off. This EQ-infused mindset will be your superpower. Three, be sure to let EQ navigate you to a future destination that enables you to be resilient, relevant, and bold. Four, let the EQ in your GPS system give you a strong sense of self. Let it mitigate your fears and enable you to master adaptability. And last, let it catalyze your authentic self as you dare to design and unapologetically and successfully navigate your own highways of the future so that you will arrive in the future of work at the right destination, at the right time, with the right mindset, and the ability to thrive on your terms. Thank you.
And now we would like to welcome you to Dr. Chaz Austin, an author and professor with private clients around the world. He has taught free courses that prepare people to self-market for the gig economy for Pierce College in Los Angeles since 2017.
I'm Dr. Charles Michael Austin, or as my clients call me, Dr. Chaz. My specialty is career packaging and marketing. Our theme is awareness, and this talk is about waking up to the gig economy. The gig economy is a labor market that's based on short-term contracts, projects, and freelance work, as opposed to permanent jobs. I train people how to market themselves for the gig economy. I'll be introducing you to some concepts that are radical and at the same time highly practical that will help you to navigate this new working world of the 21st century. We go to school and learn the skills we need in order to become physicians or social workers or auto mechanics, but we're not taught the business side. Think of your education as a tool you can use to contribute your talents and experience to others. I show people how they can monetize their education. I empower them to make their dreams come true. Today, corporate loyalty is largely a thing of the past. Corporations don't really care about their workers. They don't offer full-time work or benefits like they used to. They're happy to replace loyal, hard workers by outsourcing the work to people from other countries who will do the same job at a fraction of the cost. And as we know, they're using robots more and more to replace people altogether because it's cheaper. And the lower the labor costs, the bigger the bonuses for the company's C-level executives and the higher the stock price for their investors. This is the new reality, like it or not. So, as a working person faced with this, what do? The answer is you redefine yourself as what you now are, a freelancer, essentially your own business and your own brand, like Coca-Cola or Apple or Tesla. I train my clients and students how to define, articulate, and sell their personal brands. What is it you do? What makes you unique in the marketplace? And who will pay for the services you offer? And you can use the self-marketing skills you learned from me in every career you may have in the future, for as long as you choose to work. What this means is that you're no longer dependent on pleasing that one employer who doesn't really value your contributions. You're now your own business with your own clients. So, if you're now a business, in order to stay in business and keep growing, you're going to need to market yourself constantly. So people could better understand all this, I created it in graphic form and named it the multiple income streams approach. My students call it the wheel, and tell me that for them it's the game changer, a whole new way to see the reality of today's labor market and their place in it. Picture, if you will, a wagon wheel. The hub is your brand. The spokes represent the various ways you can earn money by marketing your skill set, talents, experience, and accomplishments to the people who need them and would be willing to pay for them. The challenge is, how many different ways can you find to generate revenue? And then, what new skills and degrees and certificates and licenses can you earn that will enlarge that revenue stream? No viable business survives for long with a single client. So given we've said you're now a business, the wheel is your blueprint for how you can create a steady stream of income for yourself from multiple sources. And part of running this new business of yours is always searching for new ways to find more clients and always adding more value to what it is you can offer them. The next step in building your business and brand is the SWOT analysis, S-W-O-T. It stands for strengths, what's missing, opportunities, and threats. Businesses have been using the SWOT analysis for decades. So given you're now a business, the SWOT analysis is a wonderful tool to help you establish that business. It has 4 quadrants. The 2 quadrants on top relate to you. Top left is your strengths. What specific skills and talents and experience do you offer that someone will pay for? This includes things like languages you speak, software programs you're proficient with, how much revenue you've generated or saved for past employers or clients. In other words, if I'm looking to pay for your services, my focus is on what you've accomplished for other people that you could do for me. In your SWOT analysis, because you're filling in the blanks either on paper or on a computer screen, there's very little drama. You're just creating an accurate inventory. And as you work on it, your list expands because you start to remember things you can do but hadn't thought of before. Now you're starting to think like a business owner. What have you accomplished in your life that people will need and that you can deliver for them? It's about taking care of your customers. For many of my clients, doing a SWOT analysis is a revelation. Filling in the strengths or assets portion of the SWOT boosts their confidence. They realize what they have to offer and that they can make money doing it. For example, I had a student in one of my courses a few years ago. I introduced the course on the first day, and then he challenged me. He said, "I hear what you're saying and how you've helped people. Let's see if you can help me." I was a Marine for 5 years, and then I was in prison for 35 years for murder. We started working together. I learned that while he was in prison, the facility kept adding buildings. He was assigned to help with the expansion and learned something called AutoCAD, which is a design and drafting software program. Over time, he became an expert at it. So we determined that what he was selling, his brand, was expertise in AutoCAD and being a Marine. And once a Marine, always a Marine. So I suggested he connect with his Marine brothers all over the world, some of whom own architectural or engineering firms and would need an AutoCAD specialist. He needed to realize, as do you, that what your potential clients pretty much only really care about is what they need and whether you can provide it. When we were done, this Marine said that I had opened something up for him that he'd never seen before. Now let's look at the top right quadrant. This has traditionally been called weaknesses, but I've renamed it what's missing. Here you get to see what you need to do or get so you can make your business more marketable. Here's an obvious example. I had a client who had many years' experience working in hospitals. Her goal was to become a registered nurse. What was missing was the degree. And from the perspective of the SWOT, she needed to turn something missing into a strength. Earning the degree will open doors that were closed to her before. No hospital is going to hire you as an RN without a degree. So she's going to get that degree so she can follow her dream. Actually, writing all of this down makes it real for people. You learn what it is you need to do, and you can begin the process of making that happen. In this woman's case, this will involve reaching out to nurses she knows to find out which nursing schools they recommend, contacting those schools to learn how long their program takes, what it costs, and then figuring out how she's going to pay for it. When working with my clients, I always start at the end. What's your goal? Like any journey, once you know where you're going, you can plan all the things you need to do along the way so you can get there. And universally, I've found if you want something badly enough, you will do whatever it takes. It's human nature. Speaking of doing whatever it takes and creating a brand, I'm an example of that. While my brand is Dr. Chaz, I began my life as the son of immigrants. My parents were forced to leave Europe to escape Hitler. I'm first-generation American and the first in my family to graduate college. I was named after my grandfathers who were Orthodox Jews. My Hebrew name is Chaim Menachem ben Moshe Halevi. My parents settled in New York and anglicized the name to Charles Melvin Ausenberg. If you're watching this and grew up in the 1950s on the Upper West Side of Manhattan and ever wondered what happened to Melvin, here I am. Then, because I thought it would help if I had a name that was easier to spell and pronounce, I rebranded to Charles Michael Austin, which after I earned my doctorate, morphed into Dr. Chaz. I said earlier that when I work with people, we always start at the end. What's your goal? And my goal is to find a university willing to do a pilot study of my program, which involves training college students on the business side in how to market themselves and monetize their education. It consists of a mandatory series of courses beginning freshman year that's embedded into a traditional college curriculum. And I will do whatever it takes for as long as it takes to find that university. And I know from past experience that my program works. And then my long-term goal is to have it adopted by every college and university in the United States. Now we turn to the bottom two quadrants of the SWOT analysis. These have to do with market conditions. Before you spend any of your time or money, you need to know if there's an end game. In the case of my client who will someday be a nurse, she needs to research whether nursing is a growing field. For what type of nursing is there a great demand? In which parts of the country? What can she expect to earn? So the bottom two quadrants deal with opportunities and threats in the marketplace for what you want to do. Like any good business owner, you do your homework before you make your move, whether it's buying or renting equipment for your home office to whether you want to invest your money and time to earn an advanced degree. It may be disappointing to learn that current market conditions are such that this is not the right time to move forward, so you'll need to reevaluate. Be flexible, maybe shift gears and go in a different direction. But as a responsible business owner, you want to know the facts and the forecast in your industry before you spend your time and money. Finally, let me explain the process of having people learn to brand themselves. The first part is having them accept and eventually embrace that A, you are in fact a brand, and B, you'll always need to sell that brand. There's a lot of resistance to doing this. Most of us just want to do what we were educated to do. I just want to do my job. I shouldn't have to sell. I hear this over and over again. Well, in the gig economy, you do have to constantly sell your services. As Denzel said, do what you got to do so you can do what you want to do. Defining your brand means determining what specifically you are selling. Here's an example. A client of mine found a job. Yes, though things are changing rapidly, there are still some jobs out there. But whether you're looking for a job or for clients, the same principles apply. This client had had 2 different and successful careers. The first one doing promotion in the music industry. And in the second one, he served as an admissions counselor in higher education. When we began working together, he had just lost the job as a college admissions counselor, one that he'd held for 16 years. He generated over $50 million in revenue for his college during that time and suddenly found himself unemployed. He was justifiably proud of what he'd accomplished in the decades he'd spent in his first career in the music industry. And they took up a full page of his resume, and I told him to delete it all. And no surprise, he didn't want to. This is why my work is a training. It takes time for people to develop what I call a marketing sensibility, to become compassionate about the needs of the people who might hire you. When you market too many of the things you've done in your life simultaneously, it can confuse potential clients. I call this muddling the brand. I finally convinced my client that people in higher education would not care about what he'd done in another industry, that it might even confuse them. What he needed for their sake was to focus on and sell what he'd done in higher ed, because that's what they were buying. So we removed everything in the resume that didn't specifically apply to higher education, and it worked. He got a better job as an admissions counselor at a more prestigious university. You too can learn to self-market. This is a tool you will need to survive and hopefully thrive in the gig economy of the 21st century. Step 2, articulating your brand. Your brand message needs to be consistent across whatever platforms you're going to be using to get the word out to your potential audience. This includes your soundbite or elevator pitch. This is a 20 to 30 second teaser and the marketing tool you'll use most often. At networking events, parties, really anywhere you might meet someone who asks, "What do you do?" And be open to the serendipity. While you'll always be focusing on your target markets, the people who will most likely need what you have to offer, you may meet someone in a coffee shop who, after you tell them what you do, might say, "That's interesting. I was just talking to a friend the other day, and they mentioned that they were looking for exactly that. Do you have a business card?" Articulating your brand extends to business cards, your bio, the headline on your social media pages, and the objective on your resume, in case people ask you for one. And it has the added benefit of pointing you to your target audience. My soundbite is training people to self-market for the gig economy. So my target market is anyone who would need my services. This includes people who are unemployed, high school and college students, and recent graduates who are looking for work, career counselors, high school guidance counselors, people who work in human resources, people who work in higher education. If you always focus on your target audience, you'll never go wrong. Pay attention to their needs. What can you do to help them achieve their goals? And how do you improve and broaden what you offer so you can better serve them? The final part of the process is selling your brand. Where do the people in your target markets live, both online and offline? What conventions and conferences do they attend? What groups do they belong to? What publications and blogs and vlogs and podcasts do they follow? People hire the people they know and trust. Your self-marketing involves finding these people and then developing and building relationships with them. Hang out, make friends, find work. Congratulations! You now have your own business and your own brand, and that means doing the work that you do and always marketing it. Incidentally, I'm not concerned with whether you're going to enjoy marketing yourself. You probably won't. But it's a new skill you will need to develop, one they never taught us in school. It does take some time to get there, but eventually, self-marketing will become a new habit, one that will bring you rewards for the rest of your life. Thank you.
And now I would like to introduce you to Barbara Matthews, the certified gerontologist, author, and radio host, has 20 years of experience in health and senior care with a special interest in Alzheimer's disease.
It was late evening when my phone rang, and I was surprised to hear my 87-year-old mother say, "Can you come pick me up and take me home?" I asked, "Where are you?" And she said, "I don't know." You need to know that my mother had not been out of the house after dark in at least a decade. She had given up driving years ago. I didn't know anyone who would just leave her somewhere. And most importantly, I was in California and she was 3,000 miles away on the East Coast. I asked, "Do you see a piano?" Hesitantly, she said, "Yes." Whew. I realized she was in her house where she had lived for 60 years. I asked, "Can you see a door beyond the piano?" She said, "Yes." So I said, "Look, I'm going to hold on while you walk to the door, look in there, see if you see a bed and a bathroom, and then come back and tell me. I'll hold on." She came back and she said, "Yes, I see them." I said, "I know where you are. I can't pick you up right now, but you're in a very nice, safe place. The bathroom is clean, the bed is clean, you can lie down, pull up the covers, and go to sleep. Nobody will bother you, and in the morning, the caregiver will be there to help you get up." Mom's Alzheimer's disease was not the usual short-term memory loss. She could remember everything, but she had confusion around time and place. Mom did have caregivers 24 hours a day, but when the bill reached $10,000 a month, it was clear that the more cost-effective way to spend her dwindling savings was to move her to a memory care community. When confronted with the news, Mom dropped to the floor, wrapped her frail little arms around the leg of that piano and wailed, "I will not leave my house." If you ask me for one word to describe old age, I say loss. Not only loss of cognition or home, but loss of work, loss of roles as a provider, parent, spouse, neighbor. Your friends die, your spouse dies. You live in a society that finds little relevance or respect for old age. You lose physical strength and energy. Suddenly, you have gray hair, wrinkles, and sagging skin. Nothing in your body works the way it's supposed to. And one of the biggest losses, your driver's license, independence. For most of our lives, we define ourselves and find meaning and purpose through what we do: work, sports, school. In old age, we lose more and more of the doing, the purpose, our identity, and all that loss leads to suffering. Our society and even health and senior care view old age as a series of losses or deficits of function. As an aging baby boomer who has worked in health and senior care for 20 years, I am terrified of the future that awaits me there. I am more than an aging body. We all, old and young, are so much more. The physical and material are important, but a balance is needed with what I call the spiritual. Today, I invite you to explore the fullness of life that I describe as spiritual, to consider 5 categories of spiritual needs and see how lack of care for them leaves a void in today's patient-centered care. And finally, to discover the greatness of purpose and joy that spiritual care can bring to your life. Let's get started with the word spiritual. In old age, there's a lifetime of spiritual development. Qualities and accomplishments like creativity, insight, wisdom, developing skills and honing talents in excellence. Virtues like love, patience, kindness, honesty, empathy. We recognize and value this spiritual development when we see it in other people because it produces beauty, order, tranquility, purpose, and happiness, not only to an individual life, but to society in general. I became aware that if we can value each other for how we can spiritually be, in addition to what we can physically do, then we can ease the loss and suffering of old age and redeem our own futures. So excited, I wrote a book about it. But meanwhile, I was working in health and senior care, not only with seniors and their families, but also on the business side. I met amazing doctors, nurses, and senior care professionals who truly cared about patients and residents. But I saw limitations, and I saw problems that affected patient care. One CEO of an agency that received referrals from medical doctors told me 80% satisfaction rate was good enough. Really? I think medicine should always aim for 100%. I saw differences among senior care communities. Some were full of purpose and joy. Residents loved living there. Employees loved working there. Others had bored, lonely residents and staff just going through the motions. The difference was spiritual care. It's needed in the workplace for owners, managers, and employees. The United States spends far more money on healthcare than any other country in the world, $3.6 trillion. So, don't you think we should have the best healthcare in the world? We don't. Year after year, compared to other wealthy, industrialized nations, Americans are more likely to be sick, disabled, and die. Actually, our lives are 3 years shorter. According to the World Health Organization, the United States is ranked 37th in the world on patient outcomes. Outcomes are measurements of quality, of excellence. When the United States spends more money on healthcare than any other country in the world, it's not a material problem. Lack of quality, lack of excellence is a spiritual problem. When you do anything, write a report, swing a golf club, remove a gallbladder to the best of your ability, with focus, intent, and care, that's the pursuit of excellence. That's spiritual. When the spiritual needs of people are ignored, their humanity is ignored. It becomes easier to justify every decision on the basis of material gain. Excellence, quality, is replaced with financially acceptable levels of liability, or how many lawsuits can we afford? As a for-profit business, American healthcare values production and consumption. Individuals become patients on an assembly line designed to maximize patient throughput. There's not a lot of humanity in that process, but growing old seems to be a billable condition, and there is a lot of revenue in that. Another example of ignoring humanity for material gain is the practice of denying millions of health insurance claims, totaling billions of dollars every year. A friend on dialysis needed replacement for a stent in his arm. The physician's order was rejected 3 times. Finally, the insurance company sent approval on the day of his funeral. He had bled to death at home the week before. Meanwhile, the average pay to a health insurance company CEO is $20 million a year. There's more than enough money. It's just not spent on patient-centered care. A spiritual problem cannot be solved with money. A spiritual problem requires a spiritual solution. In her early 80s, my Aunt Ethel lived alone on a farm in a southern state, gardening, running a successful catering business, and enjoying an active social life. She announced to the family that she wanted to move into the local skilled nursing facility where she had been visiting so many friends because there were so many interesting things to do and lots of visitors. Well, Aunt Ethel did eventually move in, and she loved it. Many of the residents had known each other for decades. Their families knew the families of staff members, and the same family had owned the skilled nursing facility and hospital for 3 generations. All the churches for miles around sent volunteers. Sunday school teachers, pastors, choir groups, even flowers. Locally grown fresh vegetables were enjoyed at mealtime. The activity director baked from scratch cakes, pies, and cookies, and between bites, residents evaluated recipes. She churned butter, and residents reminisced about milking cows and caring for livestock. Everyone went outside to watch a hog barbecued on an open-air spit. Banter over the best sauce for ribs filled the air, along with that delicious, distinctive aroma. I was there. The skilled nursing facility wasn't perfect, and the care wasn't perfect, but the residents and the staff and the owners were thriving in a community where mutual respect and mutual dependence pervaded their daily lives. They truly cared about each other. There was a waiting list of older adults who wanted to move in. Employees were fairly paid, received generous benefits, and staff vacancies were immediately filled with the most qualified nurses. The facility was clean, bright, cheerful, and well-maintained, even though 90% of the residents were on Medicaid. Nothing was worn or needed paint or repair. This was a low-income Medicaid, long-term care facility in the middle of nowhere that was wonderful. If Medicaid can do this, any place can do this. Spiritual care is cost-effective. Here are my 5 categories of universal spiritual needs and care. 1, purpose. How powerful is the search for purpose? What contribution do you want to make to the world? What gets you out of bed in the morning when your joints hurt? You think no one really needs you. You need glasses to see, hearing aids to hear, and your energy's gone after getting dressed. In a senior care community, a frail little lady sat in a wheelchair by the front door every morning and afternoon, beaming and calling out a friendly hello to all who entered. Occasionally, a visitor would take time to sit and talk for a few minutes to make a heart-to-heart connection. And upon leaving, the little lady would take their hands in hers and say, "I'm old, blind, sitting in this wheelchair. I can't do much, but I can pray for you." Purpose. Category 2, social cohesion, unity. The secret of success of Aunt Ethel's senior care community was the love, care, and concern that each person had for the other. Those virtues created unity, trust, a sense of wholeness for every member of the group. Science has proven that everything on the planet is interconnected. We accept this physical oneness, but spiritually, we don't always see ourselves in others or them in us. This lack of connection is negatively affecting our health. For example, the respected Rosetto study in Northern California showed people living in a close-knit community with social support and cohesion have half the heart attacks of people in the region and half the heart attacks of all Americans. A successful community is one where every individual acts with concern for the well-being of all members. That equity evolves to justice and then to unity. Category 3, spiritual safety. Think of a time when you felt emotionally vulnerable. How did you feel? Vulnerability, dependence, isolation are real for older adults with physical and mental decline. Like my lost mother phoning for the ride home or clinging to the piano leg, terrified of losing her home. Questions like, who will take care of my wife when I die? I've left my home and live with strangers. Will I like them? Will they like me? Will they take care of me? I was inspired by a nun who got into bed with a hospice patient, cradling her in her arms and promising her she would not die alone. When expectations for quality care are met, trust emerges. Faith in the community emerges. Optimism and loyalty of both residents and staff appear. Category 4, connection to the divine. Have you wrestled with a difficult problem and suddenly, when you weren't even thinking about it, the solution pops into your mind or comes to you in a dream? Have you lost track of time and place in a bliss of creativity? Has a chance meeting or perfect timing changed your life? These examples of inspiration, creativity, and synchronicity are spiritual powers. It's where we reconcile the tension between ourself and a greater good, where we find meaning for the losses in our lives, and in understanding and acceptance, the end of suffering. Spiritual power can be stronger than physical power. Just ask any hospice nurse who's watched a dying parent linger, waiting for a favorite child. Category 5, spiritual air, food, and water. Well, just as our physical body needs air, food, and water to live and grow, so does our spirit. For example, prayer and meditation are spiritual air that can relieve despair, anxiety, and stress. Scripture, poetry, inspiring stories are spiritual food that provide hope, comfort, and courage. Nature is spiritual water with power to immerse and refresh us. We need to hear our favorite music. It lifts our spirits. We need virtues. We need to see beauty and delicacy, to feel love and kindness, to receive fairness and justice, to hear truth. Everyone, young and older adults with dementia, needs this basic care. In closing, some of these spiritual needs are already part of senior care, but they're not considered vital. They're not written down and measured in a spiritual care plan, not reimbursed by insurance or Medicare. And what doesn't get measured or reimbursed doesn't get done. Health and senior care are based on a biological model of care with some psychological and sociological needs addressed. These three are important, but we also need recognition of spiritual needs. We need to name them, measure them, talk about them, and learn how to fulfill them, because caring for the spiritual heals the physical, lessens pain, relieves boredom and depression, gives purpose, a reason to get out of bed, and leads to better quality of life.
Do you think the world is going to be a better place next year? In the next decade? Can we end hunger, achieve gender equality, halt climate change, all in the next 15 years? Well, according to the governments of the world, yes, we can. In the last few days, the leaders of the world meeting at the UN in New York agreed a new set of global goals for the development of the world to 2030. And here they are. These goals are the product of a massive consultation exercise. The global goals are who we, humanity, want to be. Now that's the plan, but can we get there? Can this vision for a better world really be achieved? Well, I'm here today because we've run the numbers, and the answer, shockingly, is that maybe we actually can, but not with business as usual. Now, the idea that the world is going to get a better place may seem a little fanciful. Watch the news every day and the world seems to be going backwards, not forwards. And let's be frank, it's pretty easy to be skeptical about grand announcements coming out of the UN. But please, I invite you to suspend your disbelief for just a moment. Because back in 2001, the UN agreed another set of goals, the Millennium Development Goals. And the flagship target there was to halve the proportion of people living in poverty by 2015. The target was to take from a baseline of 1990, when 36% of the world's population lived in poverty, to get to 18% poverty this year. Did we hit this target? Well, no, we didn't. We exceeded it. This year, global poverty is going to fall to 12%. Now, that's still not good enough, and the world does still have plenty of problems. But the pessimists and doomsayers who say that the world can't get better are simply wrong. So how did we achieve the success? Well, a lot of it was because of economic growth. Some of the biggest reductions in poverty were in countries such as China and India, which have seen rapid economic growth in recent years. So can we pull off the same trick again? Can economic growth get us to the global goals? Well, to answer that question, we need to benchmark where the world is today against the global goals and figure out how far we have to travel. But that ain't easy, because the global goals aren't just ambitious, they're also pretty complicated. Of the 17 goals, there are then 169 targets and literally hundreds of indicators. Also, while some of the goals are pretty specific, end hunger, others are a lot vaguer, promote peaceful and tolerant societies. So to help us with this benchmarking, I'm going to use a tool called the Social Progress Index. What this does is measures all the stuff the global goals are trying to achieve, but sums it up into a single number that we can use as our benchmark and track progress over time. The Social Progress Index basically asks three fundamental questions about a society. First of all, does everyone have the basic needs of survival? Food, water, shelter, safety. Secondly, does everyone have the building blocks of a better life? Education, information, health, and a sustainable environment? And does everyone have the opportunity to improve their lives through rights, freedom of choice, freedom from discrimination, and access to the world's most advanced knowledge? The Social Progress Index sums all this together using 52 indicators to create an aggregate score on a scale of 0 to 100. And what we find is that there's a wide diversity of performance in the world today. The highest performing country, Norway, scores 88. The lowest performing country, Central African Republic, scores 31. And we can add up all the countries together, weighting for the different population sizes, and that global score is 61. In concrete terms, that means that the average human being is living at a level of social progress about the same of Cuba or Kazakhstan today. So that's where we are today, 61 out of 100. What do we have to get to achieve the global goals? Now, the global goals are certainly ambitious, but they're not about turning the world into Norway in just 15 years. So having looked at the numbers, my estimate is that a score of 75 would not only be a giant leap forward in human well-being, it would also count as hitting the global goals target. So there's our target, 75 out of 100. Can we get there? Well, the Social Progress Index can help us calculate this, because as you might have noticed, there are no economic indicators in there. There's no GDP or economic growth in the Social Progress Index model. And what that lets us do is understand the relationship between economic growth and social progress. Let me show you on this chart. So here on the vertical axis, I've put social progress, the stuff the global goals are trying to achieve. Higher is better. And then on the horizontal axis is GDP per capita. Further to the right means richer. And in there, I'm now going to put all the countries of the world, each one represented by a dot. And on top of that, I'm going to put the regression line that shows the average relationship. And what this tells us is that as we get richer, social progress does tend to improve. However, as we get richer, each extra dollar of GDP is buying us less and less social progress. And now we can use this information to start building our forecast. So here is the world in 2015. We have a social progress score of 61 and a GDP per capita of $14,000. And the place we're trying to get to, remember, is 75 as our global goals target. So here we are today, $14,000 per capita GDP. How rich are we going to be in 2030? That's what we need to know next. Well, the best forecast we can find comes from the US Department of Agriculture, which forecasts 3.1% average global economic growth over the next 15 years, which means that in 2030, if they're right, per capita GDP will be about $23,000. So now the question is, if we get that much richer, how much social progress are we going to get? Well, we asked a team of economists at Deloitte who checked and crunched the numbers, and they came back and they said, well, look, if the world's wealth, average wealth goes from $14,000 a year to $23,000 a year, social progress is going to increase from 61 to 62.4. Just 62.4. Just a tiny increase. Now, this seems a bit strange. Economic growth seems to have really helped in the fight against poverty, but it doesn't seem to be having much impact on trying to get to the global goals. So what's going on? Well, I think there are two things. The first is that, in a way, we're the victims of our own success. We've used up the easy wins from economic growth, and now we're moving on to harder problems. And also, we know that economic growth comes with costs as well as benefits. There are costs to the environment, costs from new health problems like obesity. So that's the bad news. We're not going to get to the global goals just by getting richer. So are the pessimists right? Well, maybe not, because the Social Progress Index also has some very good news. Let me take you back to that regression line. So this is the average relationship between GDP and social progress, and this is what our last forecast was based on. But as you saw already, there is actually lots of noise around this trend line. What that tells us, quite simply, is that GDP is not destiny. We have countries that are underperforming on social progress relative to their wealth. Russia has lots of natural resource wealth, but lots of social problems. China has boomed economically, but hasn't made much headway on human rights or environmental issues. India has a space program and millions of people without toilets. Now, on the other hand, we have countries that are overperforming on social progress relative to their GDP. Costa Rica has prioritized education and health and environmental sustainability. And as a result, it's achieving a very high level of social progress, despite only having a rather modest GDP. And Costa Rica is not alone. From poor countries like Rwanda to richer countries like New Zealand, we see that it's possible to get lots of social progress even if your GDP is not so great. And that's really important because it tells us two things. First of all, it tells us that we already in the world have the solutions to many of the problems that the global goals are trying to solve. It also tells us that we're not slaves to GDP. Our choices matter. If we prioritize the well-being of people, then we can make a lot more progress than our GDP might expect. How much? Enough to get us to the global goals? Well, let's look at some numbers. What we know already, the world today is scoring 61 on social progress, and the place we want to get to is 75. If we rely on economic growth alone, we're going to get to 62.4. So let's make a little sub. Let's assume now that we can get the countries that are currently underperforming on social progress, the Russia, China, Indias, just up to the average. How much social progress does that get us? Well, that takes us to 65. It's a bit better, but still quite a long way to go. So let's get a little bit more optimistic and say, what if every country gets a little bit better at turning its wealth into well-being? Well, then we get to 67. And now let's be even bolder still. What if every country in the world chose to be like Costa Rica in prioritizing human well-being, using its wealth for the well-being of its citizens? Well, then we get to nearly 73, very close to the global goals. Can we achieve the global goals? Certainly not with business as usual. Even a flood tide of economic growth is not going to get us there if it just raises the mega yachts of the super wealthy and leaves the rest behind. If we're going to achieve the global goals, we have to do things differently. We have to prioritize social progress and really scale solutions around the world. I believe the global goals are a historic opportunity because the world's leaders have promised to deliver them. Let's not dismiss the goals or slide into pessimism. Let's hold them to that promise. And we need to hold them to that promise by holding them accountable, tracking their progress all the way through the next 15 years. And I want to finish by showing you a way to do that called the People's Report Card. The People's Report Card brings together all this data into a simple framework that we'll all be familiar with from our school days to hold them to account. It grades our performance on the global goals on a scale from F to A, where F is humanity at its worst and A is humanity at its best. Our world today is scoring a C-. The global goals are all about getting to an A. And that's why we're going to be updating the People's Report Card annually for the world and for all the countries of the world so that we can hold our leaders to account to achieve this target and fulfill this promise. Because getting to the global goals will only happen if we do things differently, if our leaders do things differently. And for that to happen, that needs us to demand it. So let's reject business as usual. Let's demand a different path. Let's choose the world that we want. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Michael, just one question. The Millennium Development Goals established 15 years ago, they theoretically were kind of applying to every country, but it turned out to be really a scorecard for emerging countries.
Yeah.
Now the new global goals are explicitly universal. They ask for every country to show action and to show progress. How can I, as a private citizen, use the report card to create pressure for action?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a really important point. This is a big shift in priorities. It's no longer about poor countries and just poverty. It is about every country. And every country is going to have challenges in getting to the global goals. Even, I'm sorry to say, Bruno, Switzerland
I'm sure.
has got work to do. And so that's why we're going to produce these report cards 2016 for every country in the world. And then we can really see how are we doing. And it's not going to be rich countries scoring straight A's. And that, then, I think, is to provide a point of focus for people to start demanding action, start demanding progress.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And now I would like to introduce you to Dr. Alam Mutasib, a professor of media studies and the director of the Center for Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies at California State University, San Bernardino.
Have you ever imagined traveling to distant land, leaving everything behind you? Your family, your memories, your friends, a good job, everything, for the sake of one noble goal, seeking knowledge. It's like in the Indiana Jones movies, the adventurer Dr. Henry Walton Indiana Jones Jr., a professor of archaeology, who makes those fantastic knowledge-seeking journeys, trying to unlock hidden secrets and treasures and bringing them to light. Well, in 1998, I embarked on a similar journey when I left my homeland of Palestine towards the United States after being awarded a Fulbright scholarship. At that time, I was obsessed with the same noble goal, and that was unlocking knowledge, finishing my master's first and my doctorate, not in archaeology, but in journalism and media studies. You would think that the time of treasure hunting and unlocking secrets is over. But I would show you that I found out through the journey that I will share with you today that it was not, and that there is still a lot to go after. The secrets that I am talking about are the colonized and misrepresented histories of the indigenous peoples of the world. I started this journey by rereading Indiana Jones, or unreading it, as the father of post-colonial school, Professor Edward Said, invited us to do. Indiana Jones, the scholar adventurer who usually ventures into hostile lands or hostile indigenous lands across the globe, but he ends up usually finding treasures and wealth instead of knowledge, killing few natives in the process and bringing enlightenment to the rest of the savage natives in those dark lands. So my journey, unlike that of Indiana Jones, turned into decolonizing such films and narratives. You see, history is usually written by the colonial conquerors, the powerful, and the occupiers, not the colonized natives, the indigenous, and the occupied. This is how we have been forced to celebrate Columbus and his conquest of the Americas in this country for centuries, when we were supposed to celebrate indigenous peoples and their perseverance and heroic survival of genocide. The major reason why I embarked on my journey to the US was to unlock the secrets of why has the image of Palestinians been very negative in the US, and why don't Americans just understand what I have known all my life? We Palestinians are struggling for our liberation from a colonial force, which is the Israeli one. I left everything behind just to discover that knowledge in the US is controlled and skewed, especially when delivered by corporate-sponsored media that have become a major learning tool in the US society, or media as pedagogy, as we like to call it in academia. Having finished my doctorate in digital media, I started this long journey from seeking knowledge into critiquing and challenging knowledge, into eventually decolonizing knowledge by producing it. So let's unpack this. First, after a few years of studying media production and knowledge production, I started realizing that it was equally important to challenge institutions of knowledge and media production. If we are to narrate our own stories, we come across the challenge of accessing mainstream institutions. This is similar to the constant struggle of other marginalized groups in the US, like Blacks, Native Americans, and Latinx. We all have to constantly challenge the dominant media tropes that socially construct us in society as aggressors, one-dimensional evil characters, just like the ones you see in the Indiana Jones films. I shifted from my focus on knowledge production, such as writing academic papers and articles, presenting at conferences, and the like, into narrative and film production. And this is how my award-winning film, 1948, Creation and Catastrophe, was born. It took 14 years to take the film from a concept or out of a concept into existence when it at last premiered at the Arizona International Film Festival in 2017. This transformative journey took me back to Palestine seeking knowledge, where I left in 1998. I thought that the first step to peace in the region was understanding. That leads to justice, that leads to peace. Therefore, when I started the first phase of my fieldwork, I wanted to focus on the refugees and their stories. Although I am of Palestinian origin, I'm not a refugee. I grew up in the city of Al Khalil or Hebron under Israeli military occupation, one of the harshest colonial regimes in the world, and part of the ongoing Palestinian Nakba or catastrophe. I remember a childhood of long curfews, closures, and night raids. However, it was only when I met my husband that I realized that his experience as a Palestinian refugee was still different from mine. So my film journey started with my fieldwork in the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon and Syria in 2006, after getting few grants and buying equipment and going there. While I was studying the refugees' narratives of exile as they evolved from one generation to the next, and how those narratives shaped their memories and their identities, I also wanted to create a short video about life in the refugee camps that could be used as a classroom resource. However, my work was interrupted by the Israeli invasion of Lebanon that same year. So in 2007, I met my work partner of 12 years, Andy Trimlett. I had intended to return to the region and continue my project in 2008, but Andy persuaded me to switch to a somewhat different film project, a historical narrative of 1948, the year of the creation of the State of Israel and the destruction of the Palestinian nation. For him, it was essential to understand the past in order to understand the present, especially for an average American audience like him. The film, therefore, is a primer to the present. We teamed up and started a new chapter in this journey that none of us have thought would take 12 years to finish. We faced so many roadblocks, from funding to access to information to attacks by the Israeli lobby and its many arms, but we persevered. Over 9 years of hard labor, we were able to conduct over 90 interviews in 7 countries and in 3 different languages. We interviewed the well-known historians on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, Palestinian refugees, and Israeli fighters of 1948. We were able to amass a vast amount of archival materials, including 2,000 images and film clips from 1948. We had access to an extensive collection of both documents and photographs at the Israeli archives after hitting many roadblocks. As I said earlier, knowledge is sometimes framed, structured, skewed, and even locked. And that's what the Israelis have perfected. After Israel declassified many documents from 1948, after the 50-year embargo had ended in 1998, the Israeli authorities went back and reclassified many of those documents after the so-called new Israeli historians used them in their scholarly work. So in 2010, Prime Minister Netanyahu, at that time, extended the embargo on classified documents from 50 to 70 years. Now it has been extended again to 90 years. All of the military orders featured in the documentary came from Israeli archives using an Israeli scholar for access, Rana Sila. However, historians agree that there are still huge piles of archival materials still hidden and sealed, especially about the massacres committed against Palestinians. There have been attempts over the years by many scholars, researchers, and filmmakers to gain access to documents and photographs from the town of Deir Yassin, specifically, for example, and the massacre committed against its Palestinian citizens in 1948. But all have failed, and the Israeli government extended the embargo to 2012, then 2018, then 2038. We will never see those images of brutally murdered Palestinians or read these testimonies until the year 2038, if we actually live to see those. However, we didn't give up, and in 2016, our Israeli researcher, Rana Sila, submitted a formal request to the Israeli government to get access to some classified documents we needed for our film. But our request was also denied again. This is one way of the many attempts to erase any traces of the existence of Palestinians and their history. And just when we gave up on narrating the story of Deir Yassin, we had a breakthrough when, out of all places, we found a survivor of the massacre by the name of Aziz Aql, who had a brother he introduced us to in San Diego. Uthman Aql, the brother, also a survivor, had a wealth of memories and information on the massacre. This discovery took us 8 months back in production, especially when we were able to find the Israeli commander who was in charge of cleaning up the massacre, who also agreed to be interviewed on camera. So in spite of hiding and locking most archival materials on Deir Yassin by the Israeli government, we managed to bring the story of Uthman Aql and the other survivors of one of the worst massacres against Palestinians to light through eyewitness testimonies of the people who either survived the brutality of the massacre or created it. The Palestinian National Archives have been destroyed twice, first in 1948 and then again during the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982. And the destruction of Palestinian cultural, historical, and documentary legacy continues today. So there is an urgent need to produce more films, conduct more interviews, and collect more information. There are so many stories that we couldn't fit into our documentary. Another main challenge that anyone attempting to tell this story will face in the future is that we have lost so many of the people who lived through these atrocities. The interviews we conducted were the last ever given by many of the women and men in our documentary. The last eyewitnesses are passing away. So in spite of all the obstacles that our team faced in one modest attempt to decolonize the history of the Palestinian struggle and to challenge the dominant narrative of the hostile Palestinians, we managed to screen the film across the globe, gaining a lot of praise and defying the establishing myths of the colonization of Palestine. When the film was screened in 6 Australian cities in 2018, including Sydney, the Sydney Morning Herald newspaper, the oldest actually in Australia, listed 1948, Creation and Catastrophe, as one of the top 5 films to watch in Australia, or the best of the big screen that week. When we tried to screen the film at the West Hollywood City's Human Rights Speakers Series, our screening was rescheduled 4 different times to silence us by different arms of the Israeli lobby in the US, attempting even to change the city laws to find a loophole that would enable the cancellation of the screening. But our perseverance and insistence on practicing our constitutional right of freedom of speech allowed us actually to eventually screen the film on April 15 of 2019. Our journey is still going, and we are still screening across the world, in spite of all the attempts to silence us and lock this film away. Therefore, the film is already available on many media platforms, including iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, Canopy, which is the Netflix of academia, if you don't know it, and the in-library service Hoopla. It is also available on Rogers Cable, Canada's second largest cable video on-demand provider. And when Canopy released the film for free during the few months of the COVID-19 pandemic, it received up to 1,250 views a day. For us, this is a decolonial oral history project, and the film is only one part of it. We have amassed a huge amount of data that we don't want to be hidden or locked on our Google Drive. We want to share it with the world. While we have celebrated as humans the short-lived democratization of information dissemination with the advent of digital and social media, unfortunately, just like a horror movie with a new sequel, now we have new gatekeepers with more powerful tools, especially the use of algorithms, that make us all live in ideological tribes or bubbles. But we have to defy and resist. If the two of us could have embarked on this journey over 12 years now, to shed light on a small part of locked knowledge, I'm sure that you all can embark on similar journeys of treasure hunting and unlocking secrets. But unlike Indiana Jones, we don't want this information to collect dust in museums. We want it to interact freely with the world and tell the secrets of our own histories. We can collectively unlock and decolonize knowledge.
And now I would like to welcome back our MC, who will conclude our program.
Thank you to all our phenomenal speakers. I would now like to recognize our amazing production team. Kenneth Powell, our president organizer. Sheila Cisneros, our VP organizer. Rachel Abelgas, executive administrator. Ronald Newman, department chair of communications and faculty advisor. Angelica M. Anderson, classified advisor and director of honors liaison operations. Bradford Davis, makeup artist. Clayton Powell, audio-visual engineer and producer. Jonathan Thor, producer and manager. Jeremy Mateo, audio and visual editor. I would also like to give a special thanks to the MSJC Public Information and Marketing Office. Karen Marriott, Stephanie Kaysen, James Meyer, Ronnie Armis, Gladys Velasquez, and Eric Walker. Thanks again so much for joining us today. Immediately after, we will be having a speaker Q&A, and thanks again for watching TEDxMSJC.